All right. Let's get started. People can join after, in the middle of the presentation. But hello, my name is Kevin. I'd like to welcome all you to our monthly 0 to Auth in an Hour or Less workshop. Today we're going to be going over some authentication concepts. Going to be showing you how to set up Descope and how to implement it in your application. So without further ado, let's get started. Excuse me. So first, a little bit about me. My name is Kevin. I work at Descope. I live in San Francisco. And some hobbies I like to do outside of work and on the weekends is drive and work on cars, love to travel, and help tutor kids in math. So just in further going over the agenda, basically we first are going to go over some core authentication concepts to make sure that everybody's on the same page and that concepts like authentication and authorization are clear, and maybe go over like on a high level how it might work in the back end. And then we'll set up a Descope account. I'll show you guys how easy it is to do that. Walk you through the getting started wizard and actually set up a flow. And then finally, we're going to actually code out the authentication and implement Descope in a Node React application. So some prerequisites for that. I think it's a good idea to have a basic understanding of React, Node.js, and Express. Just so you can follow along with what I'm doing. And also to that end, a GitHub account, because we actually have a repo that we pasted in the webinar invite, but we will also paste again here, where you can actually clone the repository I'm going to use and follow along with the steps that I'm going to take. Also an IDE of your choice. I'll be using VS Code for this example, but you can use whatever you want. And finally, you'll need Node version 18 to actually run the application that I'm going to be using. So before we get into all that, though, let's just quickly go over these authentication concepts and actually, actually make sure that everyone's on the same page with what authentication really is. So authentication, the official definition is verifying the identity of a user or device attempting to access a particular application or system. So basically what that means is authentication is just validating someone is who they say they are. And so it says the goal of authentication is to ensure that the user or device is who they claim to be and to present unauthorized access. And so if you think about the difference between authentication and authorization, they're sometimes used interchangeably, but actually they represent two very different concepts. One is kind of the policing of who someone is and making sure they are who they say they are, and the other is actually figuring out if that person has access to what they're trying to do. So an analogy for this would be like at an airport, someone who walks through security and has to show their ID and say, and have it checked that I am Kevin Gao, for example. That would be an example of authentication. But then walking through security, walking to the gate, and actually scanning their boarding pass to see if they have see if they actually have paid to be on that particular plane. That would be an example of authorization. And so even though they're used interchangeably, sometimes they actually represent two very different concepts. And today we're going to be focusing on the authentication aspect of it. But if you're curious about how authorization might work, what kind of authentication methods there are and how they work, all that stuff, you can actually visit our Learning Center at www.descope.com/learn. And so you can see right there. Let's actually kind of dive in a little bit deeper and explore how authentication actually works kind of at a very high level. But, if you imagine, if I'm trying to log into Gmail, for example, I'm navigating through a browser, I go to gmail.com and I provide some form of credentials. Credentials could be something like username and password. It could be, logging in with my Google login information, something like that. And the way that this authentication process would take place is I would provide those credentials to a server. A server would then validate, basically, okay, I have the correct username and password, therefore it's safe to say that I am Kevin Gao. And then that server would generate a token, which is then returned as a cookie. Could also be returned just as a typical token stored in local storage, but for the sake of this, let's just say it's more commonly stored as a cookie. So it'll be stored on a cookie in your browser. And then every subsequent request will send that cookie to validate again that I am who I say I am. So The reason we do it like this is because if you have, let's say, if you're going on Gmail, for example, again, and I log in with Gmail, I provided my username and password, and then I want to actually, once I'm logged in and see all my emails, I want to click on a specific email and read it. Well, that's a separate request, right? And that requires fetching more data from the server, and that data actually should only be returned if I am who I say I am. Of course, you shouldn't allow other people to do that. So that's what's called an authenticated request. And that authenticated request typically would require me to log in again, provide credentials and stuff. However, the use of this access token allows me to log in once and send the token in many different subsequent requests, the access token, therefore granting me access without actually having to provide the credentials over and over again. And so that's the concept of a session. And that's like a fundamental kind of aspect of authentication, because, in reality, nobody would want to have to constantly log in again and again. And so this is an example of how the authentication part works. It validates the credentials on the server and where that information goes, and then how the session is actually managed, which is with the access token returned as a cookie and then sent in subsequent requests. So to kind of overview that, me as a user and using a desktop or mobile device, such as my laptop logging into Gmail, that typically would communicate with an app server like Google. If I'm using Gmail, or if I'm using, any of your own apps, that would be your own server. And then from within that app server, those credentials that I've, that I've provided at the beginning here, those credentials would be actually routed through an authentication service. And the authentication service would actually be in charge of verifying that that person is who they say they are, based on a user stored information, like a bunch of users stored in some kind of identity management platform, and actually creating the access token required for all the subsequent requests. So this authentication service is what Descope does. And Descope, although it is an authentication service, we actually also provide authorization as well. And so we also have full role-based authorization controls as well. But for the sake of this high-level overview, we take care of that authentication service aspect for you. So hopefully that cleared up little things, and that was helpful for you to understand what Descope actually does and how authentication might work. Now let's actually get into signing up for Descope and showing you guys how easy it is to sign up and create your first flow. And so I'll explain what a flow is and everything. We get into there. There's 2 links you'll need. So the first link is the sign up page, which is we're going to head to next. And then the 0 to auth unfinished repo you see here, that's what I'm going to be using actually in the coding section later on. So if you want to take that, if you haven't already got it from your invite, if you want to take that and clone it in your local machine, that would probably be a good idea. So without further ado, let's get into it. So I'm going to exit out of the screenshot, and I'm actually running this sign up descope.com/signup in a incognito window. The reason is because I actually already have a Descope account that I'm going to use for this demonstration. But basically, this is what you should see. And all you'll have to do is just type in your email address, or you can use any of the social login providers as well. I'm going to use just say descope.com. I'm going to log in. Totally new user, never seen before. It's going to give me a code, and then I'm going to head to my email real quick, get that code. And then it's going to ask me for my full name. I'll type in Kevin Gao. And you can see there it says, welcome back, Kevin Gao at Descope console. So click away. So hopefully, after you've successfully signed in, you should see the same thing. This is the very first time I've logged in with this account. This is a completely new account, so everything should act the same way as you. But if I click on Let's Go, it's actually going to take me to what's called the Descope console. The Descope console is where you actually handle all of the user management, access keys, where you actually generate and build out your flows and use connectors and things like that. We're going to get into all that later on. but basically this is like where all the Descope magic is configured. And so when you get to this page, we have a getting started wizard that makes it very simple to kind of generate within less than 10 minutes a flow that you can use to that basically is a way of customizing how your authentication works. And we can by going through the wizard, you can build it out very quickly. And I'll show you guys how to edit and how to change stuff in the after we're done with the coding section. But for now, let's just click on consumers. So it's going to ask you who uses your application. I'll say consumers, since businesses might require the ability to use tenants, which we don't really need in this case. Click next, and then it's going to ask what authentications do you want? What authentication methods do you want to use? So you can choose up to 2 methods. You could see here, based on the previous selection I made, it says B2C, business to consumer. And then all I need to do is let's just click on, let's say, magic link and social login. So I want people to be able to log in with Google, and I also want people to be able to log in with their email and magic link, for example. So we'll click those as the 2 primary authentication methods. Click next. Then it's going to ask us, do we want to have MFA? MFA is multi-factor authentication. It's just like a second layer of authentication on top of what we already have, or about top of our primary. To be honest, it's not really super needed. And I encourage you all to build out your own cool flows and build out the flows exactly the way you want. But for now, we don't really need MFA, so we're just going to say go ahead without MFA right here. And then this is kind of the meat of the getting started wizard and the flow builder. And so to kind of make it a little more clear what a flow is basically just how your authentication is designed to work from start to finish. And so it's a workflow where you can drag and drop action items, you can drag and drop in authentication methods, screens, whatever you want, and you can totally customize the design how you want your authentication to work from the moment someone sees the login page to the very end with the access token or JOT return. And so if you think back to the authentication, the high-level authentication overview, that kind of validating of credentials when somebody types in their information and then a token is returned, all that process can be totally customized with a flow. And so here you can see there are 4 flows that are going to be generated when I click on next, based on the information that I previously selected. This is kind of just a preview of what we can expect it to look like. So there's going to be an email address field, which is if you want to use Magic Link, and then also continue with Google, continue with Microsoft. And then what we're going to be using for our application is the sign up or in flow. That's a single flow that combines sign up and sign in. So in your application, depending on how your application works, you might want to separate these 2. But for a lot of cases, it might make sense to just, especially if you're allowing new users to sign up, you might just want to have one flow to kind of do everything. And so if I click on next here, we're taken to the end of the getting started page. So this right here is the actual flow that that was currently built for us. You see it's very similar to what the preview looked like. And it says showing sign up or in. We can look at the different flows here if we wanted to. And then right here, we have all of the code that we're going to need. So you see there's really not that much code that we actually need to embed Descope in our application. But this is a sign up or in flow. If I say continue with Google here and then sign in, what's going to happen is it's going to create a access token, and you'll be able to see that. I'm going to show you that in my other project. I just wanted to allow you guys to follow along with me and do this for yourselves. But if you want to go to like authentication methods here, you can see these are the various authentication methods that we support, and this is where you enable them, and then you can actually add them and design them in your flow here. And so this is this flow. Instead of going through this particular flow, let's actually go back to my own personal project. where I can kind of continue along with what I was saying. So right here, so if we go to the getting started page, so this is the flow that I've designed for this project. So you see the code is basically exactly the same. The only difference is the project ID here is different because this is associated with another project. This, by the way, this code is what goes into your React application, your front end, and this is how you actually implement the session validation on the backend on your server. This project ID, just to note, is not a secret. This is just how Descope associates your project with the particular flows that you've built. And so those flows themselves are baked in under a specific project, like project ID here. And then the flow that you actually want to use and embed in your application, you would put the flow ID of that flow here. So if we try to log in, you can see I log in with Google. I can use code@descope.com. And I'm in. So you can see this session jot here and refresh jot here. These are the access token and refresh tokens that we need. This is like the access token that I was referring to earlier. And then let's actually look at the flow. So this flow is this flow is very simple right now. We're going to actually add stuff to it later on when we're done coding. But basically, the first kind of starting event is to display this welcome screen, which you saw here. And then if I, let's say, click on socials, Google or Microsoft, if I click on any of those buttons, I can I'm rerouted to OAuth, which will basically just allow my users to sign up with their Google or Microsoft account. This is already pre-configured for using Descope. If you want to build your own OAuth apps, you absolutely can. But this is kind of a drag and drop, super simple way of doing it. And then finally, it just ends. And end basically just creates the access token that I was showing you earlier. It's really simple. You can see here in your flow, you can also change all the styles, change coloring. You can actually, in the actual screens themselves, you can drag and drop and build. Let's say you want to add Apple login, for example. It's as simple as that. Suddenly, all of your users have the ability to log in with Apple as well. Finally, here, before we get into the actual coding, just wanted to show you guys. So because I logged in here with Google, I have login ID here, which is associated with it's like an OAuth ID. And then this is the email that I use. Basically, this is me as a user who signed in. And what is cool is I can actually assign custom user attributes as well. In this case, I have date of birth set as a custom user attribute. And I'm actually going to show you guys later on how we can utilize this with flows and do some cool stuff with it. But for now, I think this is pretty comprehensive of what, of the basics behind the getting started wizard, behind the console. So what we want to do now is I actually want to embed this and code this in our application. So let's go back to VS Code. So we're going to start actually with the front end, with the client side. And what we're going to do is and you guys can either use, I will actually paste this project ID in, or I'll just paste this project ID in the Zoom chat, so you guys can use this flow if you would like, or you can use the flow that you created yourself in the Getting Started Wizard. Absolutely, it's the same process. The only difference would be the project ID, basically. And so let's get to it. So basically, this auth provider right here, this is what I actually need to wrap in my entire application. So in my app.jsx here, if you go back to, oh, actually, before that, let me actually show you guys how to install this. So hopefully you already cloned the 0 to auth repo. And so if you've already cloned the 0 to auth repo, you basically should have something that looks like this. And you can see there's a client and a server. Both need to be run, obviously. we're going to work on the client, like I said before, we're going to work on the client first. But basically, we want to make sure that both can be able to run. So what we're going to do is we're going to, let's see here. So we're going to, in the main unfinished branch, which should already have checked out when you cloned it. If you haven't, then just do a git checkout unfinished. And then you should be left here. What you're going to want to do is you're going to just do an npm install real quick. Okay, and then hopefully that runs fine. Then you're also going to want to do an npm link TypeScript. And then finally, you're going to want to make 2 terminal windows. Might be different depending on what IDE you're using, but the reason we're doing this is we want to have 1 terminal window run the server and 1 terminal window run the client. So now what we can do is we can do npm run server. Make sure that that runs okay. See, it's running on port 8080. And then in our second terminal window, we can do npm run client. I've actually prepared these scripts to run. So all you need to do is npm run client, and it'll automatically run the React and Node applications. So here, give me 1 second, and on localhost 2000, you can see here, this is our application, and each of this is like a basic revenue dashboard and kind of application here. And all of this information is coming in from APIs on the server side. And so when I click on something like revenue by product, you can see it actually requests from port 8080, the local host, the server that I'm running, requests the product data, and it's returned in this array with a bunch of JSONs, like you can see here. And so that's how it actually gets the information. So what we're going to do is we're going to first handle the React side and actually embed the flow in our app as an ability to log in and actually protect this this particular page, but also change things like, for example, make this login button log out if you're already logged in, and make it a little bit smarter. So things like that. You can see right now it already navigates to sign in, but there is no sign in page because we haven't embedded the flow yet. And so we're going to do all that, and then on the server side, we're going to implement the backend validation, which you see here, which is just going to, it's very simple. It's just going to check to see if the session token that's passed in from the front end is valid or not. So let's get started. So as I was saying, so we already actually have these both running. You can leave this running for now. Actually, let's quit the client because we're going to focus on the client first. And what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to go to clients, and then you're going to want to go to app.jsx. This is the main application. And we're going to, as I was about to do earlier, we're going to wrap our entire application with this auth provider. So you're going to copy this over from your own application. And then pretty much it. However, we also need to import auth provider from Descope React SDK. All right. And so now our app is successfully associated with this particular project, and we have access to all the flows. Now what we need to do is actually embed the Descope. That's all we need to do here. We need to actually embed the Descope flow component now in the sign-in page. And so remember, when we went to the sign-in page before, there was nothing there. The reason why is, as you can see, when we're returning basically nothing. This is just formatting stuff. We're not actually returning any p tags, any actual React components or anything. So what we want to do now is we want to actually import Descope from the Descope React SDK. And then what we want to do is we want to paste this in here. Descope flow component. That's actually what will display the, oh, sorry. We're actually gonna put it in between the divs here. So it's nice and formatted. And this is what's actually going to display our sign up or in. So remember, just going back here, this is what our sign up or in page looks like. And so now if I have this Descope flow embedded in these divs, whenever you go to the sign in page, you should be able to see this flow component. So let's test that real quick. Let's actually run the server again. Do npm run clients. Okay, so let's see. Looks like it's running now. So let's actually take a look. If we go to log in, great, you see the flow now. And so this will actually allow us to sign in. I can show you right here under local storage. So let's actually clear out local storage real quick. So you can see here, there's no DS or DSR tokens, but when I actually log in, DS and DSR, by the way, are the access token and refresh token. That's what's generated from the flow. So now, even though nothing happened because we haven't actually done any logic yet, we just logged in. You can see here, if we go to application, you can see there's a DS and DSR token here, which is the new access and refresh token that was created when we logged in. And then you can see it should have redirected us back to the main page. Reason it didn't was because we didn't change this onSuccess function. So we actually have an onSuccess callback right here that navigates to the home page. We just need to actually embed this. So you can actually just put the onSuccess function as onSuccess here. And then now when I log in again, so if I go back to sign in, if I log in again, it should take me to the home page. Perfect. Cool. All right, so we got that. Now what we want to do is we want to actually change this login button so that when I actually click login and I sign in, it should actually say log out, and it should actually log me out, and it should invalidate all of those tokens that you see in the browser. And so in order to do that, we're going to use the React SDK again, and we're going to do that on the in the nav bar. So the nav bar, if you can see here, I have this all expanded so you can see where exactly I'm getting this sign in. I think I glossed over where sign in was. It's under auth sign in.jsx. Components, header nav bar is where the navbar.jsx file that I'm going to be using is. As you can see here, I already have two callback functions, one for log out, one for log in, navigate to the same place. However, log out is going to actually do something else, right? It's going to actually log me out before navigating to sign in. And that's why there's two callback functions here. Also, there's two popovers. The popover that you saw there was the login one. You can see it's being used. That's why it's highlighted. It's not highlighted here. This one is not highlighted because I'm not actually using it yet. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to import a few things from the React SDK. So I'm going to import use session. And I'm also going to import let's see, I think it's use Descope. Perfect. So from there, after I initiate navigate, I can actually define the logout function using use Descope and use this logout function within logout user. So what I can do is I can wrap in a try catch logout, specifically say await logout, and then I can say in my try catch perfect. So here I have my logout function, which is an async function that will just log me out. After it logs me out, it will navigate to sign in. Otherwise, it will just return an error. And then you can see this is the use Descope. The use session, on the other hand, was actually to allow me to figure out if someone is authenticated or not. Because if somebody is authenticated, then we're going to want to display the logout popover, not the login popover. And so the logout popover right now is not currently being used. But if we use this use session and we say, okay, const is authenticated equals use session. This is actually a React hook that will tell the React app if somebody is authenticated or not. Basically, we'll look for valid session tokens in the local storage. And then this right here, we can display by dynamically checking whether or not a user is authenticated or not. And so what I can do is under popover here, where I'm just using login popover, instead of just displaying the login popover no matter what, I can do is authenticated and if I am authenticated, then, oh, sorry, hold on. So if I am authenticated, then I want, or sorry, if I'm not authenticated, then I want to display the login popover. But if I am authenticated, so I'll copy this, paste it again. If I am authenticated, then I want to display the logout popover. And so what we've done here is we've added logout user and actually, allowed our user to use or allowed our application to use the SDK to actually log the user out instead of just returning, instead of just navigating back to sign in. We're also going to display the logout popover, which actually shows logout in red if the user is authenticated, otherwise show log in with green. And so let's kind of all take a look at what we've done so far. So here, now it says log out because actually, if you remember, we're already logged in. But if I click log out, now it should have logged me out because the logout popover here on click calls logout user. So let's see if that actually worked. Let's actually go to the application real quick. You can see there's no DS and DSR tokens. There's no access tokens anymore. And now if I try to log in again, actually before that, let's go back to host here. You can see now it says log in instead of log out because I'm not logged in. So now if I log in, it says log out and DS and DSR are there. So basically, we have our application now able to determine if a user is logged in or not, which is really helpful for designing how your UI works. And then also we have full logout capabilities. We have a full sign-in page. Anytime you change anything on the sign-in page here, we'll automatically update your application because again, it's just associated with the project ID. That includes just how you design your flow or anything else in the console. So super nice. And then from there, we really only have one other aspect to this, and that is we need to be able to send that session token to the server when we make those API requests, because eventually the server is going to be able to use our Node SDK to validate the session with that session token. And so if you go to dashboard, you see here, dashboard is under dashboard.jsx. You can see here, there's a lot of logic here. It's not super important, like open notification of icon. This actually is automatically, this is something that I added so that it will automatically redirect you to the login page if the API fails. So in other words, if you're unauthorized, for example. But what's really only important is this part right here. So every time it's requesting something, it's returning in the HTTP header the authorization header with the word bearer, nothing else. What we need to do is actually include the session token. This is the proper way to handle this the proper way to handle session management and authenticated requests is to include the access token is a bearer token in the authorization header. And so the way we're going to do that is we just have to import get session token from the React SDK. And then you can see here, before response, all we need to do is just say const session token equals get session token. So we're just going to call get session token, very simple. And then this will just return the session token and set it as a const. And then what we can do is we can just actually include it here in our authorization header. So now when I make a request, if we look at the console, every time we make a request, you can see in the header, now you see bearer, but also this session token. And this session token is our DS token that you saw in the application right here, same token. And so now the server actually can, get your session token from the client. And that's what it's going to use to handle the session management. So as you can see, the number one biggest priority, I guess apart from adding the sign-in page, was right now, I can still, even if I'm logged out, like I'm logged out here, even if I'm logged out, I can still access all this information. Why? Because there's no middleware in the server to actually validate that that session token is correct. And so let's build that out now. So we're actually done with doing everything in the client side. We're going to focus now on the server. So if we close client, go to server, and go to index.ts, this is the actual Express server. If you're familiar with Express, this should look very familiar. This is our Express server that we have here. These are the routes that we're getting that you saw. Those are the APIs that return product data, priority data, bar chart. All that information is actually just, it's not connected to a database or anything. It's just set, manually in these .ts files. But basically, what we want to do here is we want to use the Node SDK and actually implement the session validation and build out the middleware for this. So pretty simple. All we need to do is just import one thing, which is the Descope client, which would be from the Node SDK. And this is going to allow us to associate our server, our backend server, with using your project ID associated with all of the information that is defined in your console. And so if we want to instantiate that, we can instantiate that here. We can say const client auth equals Descope client project ID. Oh, sorry, hold on. It's going to be, sorry, we're going to import Descope client. To say Descope client and then project ID. And our project ID is just going to be the project ID of the app we're using. This is this one right here. So we're just going to put that in here. And then we have const client auth equals Descope client project ID. So this is what's going to allow us to call functions that are baked into Descope clients, such as validate session token, things like that. And this is just, it basically makes it very simple to validate your session token with just basically one line of code. And so since we have this client auth now, we can actually define the middleware. And the middleware, I'll call it something like auth middleware equals, and then I'll make it an async function. And then we have in the request itself, because we're using TypeScript, I have to define the request and the response. And then finally next as next function. All right, perfect. And then we don't actually need this. And then this right here will, under auth middleware, we can actually just wrap one simple call from your client auth in this right here. This call right here is const auth info equals await Descope client validate session. And so if I All right, and then paste that in there. So const auth info equals await. Descope client, remember, is actually called client auth. We call it client auth up here. And then validate session token. That is actually going to be from the request itself. And the request itself, you need to actually get the token from the request itself. And so we're going to use this auth helpers method here that I wrote, which is basically just getting it from the authorization header and then splitting the bear word from the rest of the token and just returning what the token is. And so what we can do is we can import get token from auth helpers, auth helpers.ts, and we can use that function get token and pass in the request. So now this will take the request, find the token that was returned, and then use our Descope client associated with the same project ID to actually validate whether or not the session is accurate. If it is accurate, great. If it's not, we could do something. It doesn't really matter. We could just say something like res.status 401, and then return like a JSON with something like error, new error, unauthorized. Cool. All right. And then finally, once this is, and then also we want to just return it if it fails. Obviously, we don't want to continue onwards. We don't want to do anything else. And then here, after it successfully completes, we want to just call the next function. And so with using Express, if I want to use this middleware, I can just say router.use auth middleware. And then what's going to happen is in the routes, when you call, it's going to get the request. It's going to actually pass this through. And if it's successful, it's going to continue on to the next, which is actually just sending the product data in the response. And so now let's give this a shot. So this server, I'm not using NodeMon or anything, so let me just rerun the server real quick. And then if I go refresh the page here, if I click on priority deals, you can see it says unauthorized, redirecting the sign-in page. And then it will actually redirect me to the sign-in page eventually. But if I log in to Google, I can see the information because the network requests show a 200 versus when I'm not authenticated and I'm logged out, they should show a 401 right here. All right, so just to recap, I have a Node Express application, server running that I built out the middleware for, can validate the session. And the session token is returned or is included in each request as part of the authorization header. So I have this middleware built out here using the Descope client. And then also in the actual application itself, I wrapped it with Auth Provider. I have built in a sign-in page. I dynamically changed login to log out and vice versa, depending on if the user is authenticated or not, and actually implemented the logout functionality with the invalidation of the session tokens as well. And then in the dashboard, I changed the actual requests themselves to include the session token and use the get session token method in the Descope SDK. So pretty much that's all it is. That's really all you need to do to kind of do all of those steps and build out Auth. You can see it's pretty simple to implement especially with all of our SDKs, to implement all of this functionality in your own application. What I'd like to do now for the last 15 minutes or so is actually go through real quick and show you guys how flows can be how you can use the power of flows to really dictate how you want your authentication to work and utilize specifically connectors to do that. And a connector, we have a variety of connectors here that actually allow you to kind of integrate Descope in your authentication with any of these services very easily. But however, the one we're going to focus on is just a generic HTTP client. And basically, a connector is just the ability to interact with a third-party service. In this case, make an API request to some generic HTTP client. And so what I'm going to use for this demonstration is actually in our flow, we already have these three items here. And so I've already pre-prepared them because I didn't, because I wanted to make sure I had enough time for questions. But basically, this is the flow that we have here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to drag and drop and put all of these three blocks in my flow. So you can see here, after whether I log in with email or log in with social login, both go to this random data connector. This random data connector is going to call random data API users and actually return a random, basically a JSON full of dummy user information. And this will be mapped to connectors.random, mapped to this key. And so then what I can do is I can actually update the custom attribute, which is the date of birth custom attribute that I showed you here. I can map that date of birth to what comes in that from date of birth. And so let me show you what that actually looks like here. If I go to here, let's save this real quick actually, and then I'll go to connectors, and you can see here I can test this API. So you can see here the actual response that I get from this API includes a section called date of birth, and it'll say 1985, 11/18. This is all generic random information about a user. And so what I'm doing is I'm basically just mapping that date of birth value to the custom attribute for the user that signed in. And then every time I log in, it's going to do that. And then it's going to add the custom claim to the job with the key DOB. And so it's going to take this date of birth and going to map it automatically there. And then finally, it's going to end the flow and actually create the job. So nothing really needs to be shown in the actual application itself. But what I can do is now when I log in, you can see date of birth is set to 1998-01-29, which wasn't there before. Here it used to show nothing. Now it shows 1998-01-29, and that's actually from the API that we hit in this flow. And so these connectors can be super powerful, and this is just one of the cool things we can do with flows. But that is, an example of how you can really customize and define how you want your authentication to work. Another quick example would be something like if you wanted to add an authentication method that maybe you hadn't used before. So for example, if I wanted to use something like, if I wanted to use passkeys, for example, I could just drop that in there, and then, I could just drop that in there, and then I think it's drop this in here into my flow. And then do you see where it now says passkey web authn? I can actually just drag in another option, web authn, sign up or in passkeys, and then do the same thing I've done for every other authentication method and just connect to the connector here. Click save. And now you can see what I'm doing is this passkey, now in my actual application, I now have the ability to log in with passkeys. So it's really as simple as that. And if I try to log in now, and I try to log in with, let's say, something like Kevin plus 100 at descope.com. Passkeys. It will actually create a new passkey for me. I can use my biometric information, and boom, I have access. And you can see under custom user attributes, this is the actual response from the API, and this is what the JOT looks like if it's decoded. You can see it has the date of birth, like we expected. That has the web authentication method I used. And the next time that I log in, which is really awesome, is what I can do is the next time I log into my application, I can use my passkey, Kevin plus 100, continue, and automatically log in. So that's another great thing about flows, and the ability to just drag and drop and just build exactly what authentication methods you want, which ones you don't. You can even design stuff like, you can even design custom flows to have different screens depending on what region you're located in. For example, if you want to have a conditional statement here, and you want to say that if the geolocation contains Afghanistan, for example, you can redirect to a different screen and have a totally different user experience for that. Versus if it's someone from the US, for example, I'm based in the US. So if I use this condition here, didn't name it or anything, but if I use this condition here, and if I drag start here and then connect to this here, then it would just show the actual screen. But if I was in another country, for example, it wouldn't. And so these are all the cool things you can do with flows. And there's a lot more. I encourage you to look at our website. But I want to leave the last 7 minutes for questions, if anybody has any. So I'm happy to answer them now. Hopefully my colleague has been answering any questions you might have had previously. Let's see. Can I use Descope Webflow? Absolutely, you can use Descope Webflow. So the React SDK that we have is actually based on, it's based on a core WebJS SDK, and Webflow does allow you to use JavaScript and custom code in your websites to actually log in, and not only log in, but also actually handle the session management and everything like that. And so there's actually a template that Descope has on Webflow's website, where you can go and see how it's actually implemented and see how to access all of the information, like, for example, names and things like that that's returned when you're successfully logged in from the SDK. You can display that dynamically in your application. You can use HTML and do all that. So there's a template there. There's also a guide on our docs page on how to use that, and it has a link to a template as well. Any other questions? Can I have your custom? Yes, absolutely. You can use a custom domain. So this is available for our pro tier, but basically here you can actually define what your app URL is and then configure your custom domain. It will instruct you on how to actually configure the CNAME in your own Cloudflare or whatever. And then you can have your custom OAuth apps like Google and Facebook and stuff actually use your own domain and everything, so you have a fully custom login experience that has your logo and everything like that. You can do all that from all these self-service tabs right here. Anything else? For OAuth, do I have to use the Descope app, or can I use my own app? Yeah, so as I said earlier, absolutely you can use your own app. That can be found under authentication methods, OAuth, and then here you can use your own account, use the client ID and client secret that like Google Cloud, the Cloud Console will give you, and then define your redirect URL here. If you're using a custom domain, which I expect, if you're probably doing this, you probably would be using a custom domain, then this will automatically be updated based on the custom domain that you've configured in your project settings here. Yeah. Cool. Anything else? We have about 3-4 minutes. No? Okay. Well, this has been Yeah, this has been really great. And feel free to play around with our product. Feel free to use this little conversation DevRev AI thing right here, where you can actually send us messages and you can have conversations with our DevRel team. Or if you have any other questions about it, you can open issues on GitHub. You can do there's many ways you can contact us. Also, I encourage all of you to join our Auth Town Slack community, where you can ask questions. We have thousands of developers on there that are consistently asking questions on a daily basis and trying to understand things and trying to work with a variety of frameworks and stuff like that are a little bit more niche. So feel free to check all that out. But yeah, thank you for tuning in, and hope you all have a wonderful day.